Christmas, everyone. If you're watching this, more than like you are a lucky recipient of my Irish soda bread mixing jar. And in this video, I'm going to show you guys how you can make it. This can either be for yourself and enjoy it with some jam, or you can make it for a party because it is quite a large loaf.
So I've included a list of ingredients that are in the jar and also what is needed. Now, in the buttermilk, I call for 1 2/3 cups, but you may use closer to 1 1/2 cups.
The first thing you're going to want to do is take the contents of your jar. Yours probably look more like this than like this. And you're going to empty it into a large mixing bowl. All the dry ingredients are already in here. What you're just going to want to do is take some kind of spoon or some kind of mixing thing to make sure it's thoroughly mixed. The soda bicarbonate was at the top, so you want to make sure that's really incorporated through the entire dry ingredients before we start mixing in the wet ingredients. When you're mixing this, maybe if you have someone in the house, you can get them to set your oven to 200 degrees Celsius, or I think it's like 395 Fahrenheit. And you do not want your fan on for this one, no convection fan. So once it's all thoroughly incorporated, you'll see all the ingredients are mixed well in here. You can start to mix in your wet ingredients. Now the only thing you need in addition to the dry contents of your mixing jar are 400 milliliters of buttermilk. It's better if it's full fat, but the low fat can be used. Now when you're making this, first you're going to incorporate about half of it, 200 milliliters, which is a little less than a cup. So I start by getting about a cup in there. Perfect. And just start to mix it in. Now you can use your hands. Eventually I will get my hands in here, but the goal is to get all of the flour incorporated into the buttermilk. It's really helpful if your buttermilk is very cold. You want your buttermilk to be super, super cold. The reason is this is a fast bread, so it requires no proofing whatsoever. Once everything's been mixed, you can put it right into the oven. The reason why that is the buttermilk and the sodium bicarbonate act as a leavening agent. So there's no yeast in this bread. All it is just those two ingredients that cause the rise. But because of this, you really need to be careful with how quickly you do this. You want to do this as quickly as possible because it will start to rise very, very quickly. And we're going to slowly start to incorporate the rest of our buttermilk into this. Soon I'll be able to get my hands in here. Now, the recipe calls for I think it's 1 2/3 cups plus or minus, if we're thinking in American measurements. You might not have to use all of that. Sometimes I'll use 1 1/2 cups, but 1 1/2 to 2/3 cups works very well. So in total, just so you have this for your recipe, you should be using between 1 1/2 cups and 1 2/3 cups of the buttermilk. Like I said, sometimes, depending upon what kind of flour you use, it will require a little bit more buttermilk. And you can see as I'm starting to incorporate this, I want all of my flour to be incorporated. You can see that there's still some dry bits in there. I'm almost getting there. And everyone's favorite part. Getting the hands in. Alright. So this should be probably a wetter dough than what you're used to for a lot of home bakers. It's going to be quite wet. So don't be concerned with that. That's exactly how it's supposed to look. You can even start to see, at this point you can see the dough will actually start to appear bigger and bigger as you incorporate it. Now this looks good. See how wet that is? That wet is perfectly fine. Do not be concerned with that at all. So this really kind of sums up part 1 of the video, is actually making the dough. Next I'm going to show you guys how to get it onto a baking tray and form it properly, and then we're going to get it into the oven and know when it's finished. Alright, so now remember, this bread does not require any resting time whatsoever. In fact, the faster you move with it, the better. So we have our dough rocking and rolling. Again, you can already start to see minutes after it's been mixed, it's starting to rise, so we want to start moving quickly. The next phase after mixing your dough is getting your dough into the shape that you would like. So I'm going to flour my hands a little bit just so nothing sticks. I like to use silicone baking mats. If you have those at home, those will work perfectly. If not, parchment paper is fine. Just make sure if you're using a silicone baking mat that it's on a baking sheet where it lies flat. Because if you have little pockets underneath of it, then the crust on the bottom will not prepare evenly. So make sure everything lies flat. Now for this, I normally use just like a cylindrical shape or a ball shape, just because it gives us a better surface area for it. So we just get the dough out and where we want it. Again, I'm trying not to touch it too much with my hands at this point because the heat will start to work some of these chemical reactions faster than what I would like. There we go. Give my hands a little floury just so we don't get any more sticking. Again, very simple cylindrical shape will do. Nothing fancy. Rustic loaves are in right now. And I tend to flatten it out. Once you kind of get in the ball shape, flatten it just a wee bit on the top. And you'll notice it should move like that. That's good. We want it to be able to have a little bit of jiggle to it. I'm going to put a little flour on it just on the top for it. So again, don't spend so much time forming this. It really doesn't matter. It'll rise pretty evenly. You just want it a little flat on the top because we're going to get a nice shot of that. Now, forming the dough for this one isn't as important as with other loaves, but is really important is scoring it. Now you want to take a very, very sharp knife. It's going to be a paring knife, chef's knife, but you want to make sure that it's really, really sharp. As sharp as it can be, because again, you don't really want to be spending a whole bunch of time working your dough. Now these cuts you want to be relatively deep, and what we're doing is we're going to quarter it. So it's going to look like, now I tend to do it a little bit off center. I think it just looks prettier. And what this does is this gives a place for the oxygen in the dough to come out. So we're kind of controlling the rise. And this can be deeper than most times when you score a loaf. But again, we're just quartering it. What this is going to do is it's going to cause it to rise up, and the oxygen is going to all come out the middle. So you have that really nice shape that we like to see, especially in an Irish soda bread. We have our ovens preheating. Again, 395. 400 is fine. And we're going to bake this for about 30 minutes. I'll show you guys once my oven's preheated, us sliding it in, and then we're also going to take it out so you can see what it looks like when it's finished. If you haven't realized for this bread already, this is a really nice one to do with children, just because when people make breads, kids can sometimes lose interest very quickly. And this requires no proofing whatsoever. It doesn't require first proof, it doesn't require shape, it doesn't require second proof. Realistically, you can have this bread mixed and in the oven and completed in a little under an hour. So it's something you can do with the kids prior to dinner, and they can see a loaf of bread come out with dinner, and again, they can call it their own. This is a really versatile recipe. I'll make sure I'll put a link in the bio with the actual ingredients in the dry stuff, so if you want to make it again. Just as a kind of quick summary, the only thing you need, 1 2/3 cups buttermilk. You probably won't need, in fact, you can see I didn't really use 1 2/3 cup. Again, it just kind of depends upon your flour. Another summary note, don't handle the dough very much, work quickly, score the top. Other things you can do with this bread is you can mix in things like chopped currants. If you want like a sweeter version that's very authentic Irish, you can mix in things like raisins. If you want it to be more savory, you could use like an Irish cheddar, just by mixing in maybe like a 1/4 cup or a 1/2 cup of Irish cheddar. The fat, because of the buttercream, will have no impact on the rise of the bread. I would probably, if you're going to mix the cheddar in, though, mix it in with the buttercream. So get the cheddar in there and then pour it in. And make sure the cheddar is very cold. I would probably freeze it if I were to do that. But shortly, I think our oven will be preheated and we can slide this on in. Alright, so now our oven is preheat to 200 centigrade or about 395 Fahrenheit. Again, loaf is scored. Now you want to make sure that this goes in the middle rack, because this will rise up a good bit. So if you have it close to the top, you could actually rise to it. Hits the heat element, or it could actually stun it, or not stun it, but it could slow down the rising process if it gets too hot. So let's get in the middle rack, and now we play the waiting game. So we get it in for about 30 minutes or till it sounds hollow. Now a lot of people will say we're looking for golden brown. The issue is, since we're using a mixture of whole grain flour as well as bread flour or white flour if you chose to use that. It's kind of hard to see golden brown because of the dark color of the whole wheat flour. All right, so let's wait. All right, so now we're gonna pull it from the oven. Now, I had it initially at 30 minutes. I took it out and it wasn't as hollow sounding as I would like, so I put it in for another 5. Now this looks much better. Again, you'll notice the crust on the outside is a nice golden brown, and you see some golden brown pieces here. And
your eyes are like,
let me turn down Dean Martin for a second. We want a nice hollow sound, and that sounds good because it will continue to cook for a little bit longer even though it's been taken out of the oven. Now I would let this rest. You can either let it rest on here if the bottom is not if it's dark, I would get it off the baking mat. But I honestly like the way the bottom of this looks. I could probably let it stand to stay on here for a little bit longer. Make sure you let it cool completely before you cut it. Or if you want to store it, make sure it's cool completely before you store it. But honestly, it's probably best to be eaten right away. You can let it rest on a baking mat again, or you can let it rest on a cooling rack. You'll notice this one really kind of grew outward, not as much upward, which is perfectly fine, but you can still clearly see the score in it, which is really what we were looking for. So, hope this video is helpful for you when you making your Christmas bread. I hope you really enjoy it, and I hope you continue to use this recipe with soups, if you're hosting parties, for dinner parties or whatever. It's a really versatile bread, and it's really fun, and everyone loves homemade bread. So wish everybody a Merry Christmas and a Happy New Year.